I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. I woke up this morning with my mind and it was stayed on freedom. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hey, I'm walking and talking with my mind stayed on freedom. Oh, I'm walking and talking with my mind stayed. Yes, I woke up and this morning with my mind and it is stayed on. Yes, hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hey, ain't no harm to keep your mind stay on free. Oh, ain't no harm to keep your mind stay on free. Oh, ain't no harm to keep your mind stayed on free. Oh, hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Oh, I woke up this morning with my mind and it was stayed on freedom. I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. I woke up this morning with my mind and it was stayed on. Oh, hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Do you believe that? Do you believe that? That's another song that we used to sing that said, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. And the truth of the matter is we all need to be a light. And there ought to be something on the inside of us that shows up on the outside. And somebody ought to see that there's a change that has taken place in us. So this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Do you believe that? Come on, let's clap and let's join in together. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Yes, everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Yes, all along the road, I'm gonna let it shine. All along the road, I'm gonna let it shine. All along the road, I'm gonna let it shine. I let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Oh, in my neighbor's home, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, in my neighbor's home, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, in my neighbor's home, I'm gonna let it shine. I let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Oh, shine, shine, shine. I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, shine, shine, shine. I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, shine, shine, shine. I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Yeah, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Come on, believe it. Put your hands together. This little light of mine, can we hear everybody sing it? Come on, sing it like you mean it. We ought to be raising the roof off this place. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Come on, put your hands together. If you know you have a light and you don't mind letting it shine, why don't you put your hands together if you made up in your mind, Shreveport, that you are going to be the light?
Good evening, Shreveport. Good evening, Shreveport. All right, will you try this with me? Poor People's Campaign. A national call for moral revival. Poor People's Campaign. A national call for moral revival. Poor People's Campaign. A national call for moral revival. Poor People's Campaign. A national call for moral revival. Poor People's Campaign. A national call for moral revival. Poor People's Campaign. A national call for moral revival. It's powerful to be here with y'all. We are here on a 25-state tour. It's the We Must Do More, mobilizing, organizing, registering, educating people for a movement that votes. And we're here in Shreveport, Louisiana. What we want to do this evening is start off with a welcome from our host pastor, why he's a part of this Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, and welcoming us into this beautiful house of worship this evening. So Pastor James Green and Dr. Markey.
Thank you. Why don't you give the Lord a praise offering? Come on, y'all can do better than that. Come on. Why don't you do this? Look to the left, look to the right, and tell whoever's beside you, it's a pleasure to be sitting beside you today. And tell them, if you don't act right, I will never sit beside you again. Give the Lord another praise offering. Amen. Certainly we'd like to welcome you, and we're not going to waste any time. You're welcome here. I'm going to give you a grandma's welcome. You're welcome once, you're welcome twice, you're welcome, welcome, welcome. Amen.
Thank you, Pastor, and we are so excited to have all of you here today at the Union Mission Baptist Church, number 1, the community church with a worldwide vision. And it is so important that you are sitting here today at this time and at this place. Let me promise you that you're in the right place at the right time to receive a blessing from God. The M.O.R.E campaign says mobilizing, organizing, registering, and educating. Let me remind all of you that we are in voting season. And early voting begins on November the 2nd through November the 9th. Now that's just a little bit over a week away, and we have a moral responsibility to ensure that we get out and go vote. We do recognize and realize that turnout was only 38.8% here in the city of Shreveport. Now that is something that is disturbing to me and unacceptable. We as a people understand that there were people that fought for us to have this right. Please don't sit on your you-know-whats between November the 2nd and November the 9th during early voting. There is a time. We are in turbulent times right now. We could potentially lose from working families their insurance. There is assaults on education right now. People, this is serious. It is time to go and vote. We welcome you here to the Union Mission Baptist Church, and please take back to someone else that you have a challenge from us. That not only do you go and vote, that you take 5 people and you go take them to vote, or call them to go and vote, or tell them to go and vote, but make sure that you have an action. Thank you so much.
We can do better than that. Come on, let's give a big round of applause. My name is Reverend Dr. William Barber. I serve with Liz Theo Harris as co-chair of the campaign. We are on this 25-state tour, and today we're in Shreveport, tomorrow in St. James Parish, and then we're coming back for the end of March in Baton Rouge as it relates to environmental devastation and ecological devastation, Cancer Alley. Our gatherings are nonpartisan but not non-political. We are clear on issues. That's why we say we register people for the movement who vote, because people need to be engaged in a movement that helps politicize them on how to vote. And we also have a movement that continues and fights even after the election. I want to ask those of you that can, the organist play something a little light. If you want to, I want you to move up some and make sure that we have we keep maybe the back 4 pews full and then, empty. And if you can move up some on each side, we want to be tight. We believe in being together. We go to jail together, we march together, we stand together, we fight together. So kind of be close and try to, and if you can, find somebody we don't want all the black folk in one place and all the white folk in another place. This is a movement where we invite everybody to be in and be a part. That's right. Everybody has a part. Everybody has a place. Everybody has a part. Everybody has a place. Now, reach over and touch the person sitting beside you and say, somebody's hurting our people. and it's gone on far too long, and we won't be silent anymore. We must do more. Mobilizing, organizing, registering, educating people for the movement who vote. Now, we also have thousands of people. These gatherings are never just for the city it's in. We come to cities, but there are thousands of people online from all over the country and from all over the world. Sometimes we have as high, one time we had 100,000 people on. And so wave at them. They're all over the world, all over the country. Welcome them. And that's because we're building a movement. June 2020, say that with me, June 2020. We'll talk more about that then. The other thing about these gatherings is we recognize that we have to have the joy of the Lord, because God's joy is our strength. But we also have to have prophetic truth and the ability to mourn. Because the Bible says, blessed are they that mourn. And I think sometimes we've lost. I come from a Pentecostal Church of Christ background. I'm a little bit of everything. But sometimes we have lost the ability to mourn. And blessed are they that mourn, when Jesus said it, it meant blessed are they who cry with other folks' tears. Blessed are they that hurt with the hurting so much that it makes them want to help change things. Huh? St. Francis said, Lord, bless me in a way that I don't ignore the tears of others. And so part of these gatherings is to sensitize people why it's so important that we have a Poor People's Campaign, a national call for a moral revival in this particular moment. Now, normally right here, we would show a video. Is it ready? A video. They're making some adjustments because we show what's going on. A lot, what we show, you won't see it on the TV yet. That's why we're having this movement, until America is willing to show what's really going on. What's really going on. They are adjusting, am I right, the video, and so it will come up afterwards. Also in these settings, we always have movement singing. Did you notice the songs were about the movement, right? The songs were about the movement. And then we have testifiers from Louisiana, because we have to put a face on this stuff. Too often we have movements where people speak on behalf of folk. The Poor People's Campaign is not about a bunch of people getting up speaking on behalf of the poor, on behalf of people who've been affected by systemic racism and ecological devastation and the war economy and the false moral narrative of religious nationalism or Christian nationalism. We are building a stage for people to speak on their own behalf. We believe in the agency of impacted people. And to help us with this, and then we'll look at the video, I think they'll be ready afterwards. You give y'all a few more minutes? Is that right? A few more minutes. So at this time, to help us understand real clear about what this movement is, I want you all to give a Shreveport welcome. And Pastor Green, thank you so much for having us come here to this historic church. But I want to ask you to give a Shreveport, Louisiana welcome to one of the most brilliant sisters I know, who has committed her life to this work of battling poverty for years. She's a PhD in New Testament with a focus on liberation and economic, what the Bible has to say about economics. But more importantly, or as importantly, she has a heart. She could be stuck in a classroom, but she's taken all that God has given her and chosen to be in the centerfold of the movement. And she truly believes in the agency of poor and impacted people. So would you invite tonight, or welcome tonight, the Reverend Dr. Liz Theo Harris to set our course for tonight while we're here. Come on, Reverend Liz.
Good evening. Good evening. Good evening, Shreveport. Good evening, Louisiana. Good evening, the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. So I want to start with a little bit of the Bible, because I follow a God who said that I've come to preach good news to the poor. A God who, when the people asked for God's name, said, I am the one who led you out of Egypt. How God defines himself, how God wants his followers to understand, why God is so upset about worshiping idols. The story of the golden calf. It's not because God doesn't like sculptures or art or beautiful things. It's because God needs God's people to understand that what distinguishes our God from other powerful things in society is that this God is a God of liberation. Not a God who didn't make enough food for everybody. Not a God who says, I want Peter to have to rob Paul. Not a God that shouts, get a job to those who are homeless in our society. Not a God who proclaims that just a little bit of charity is going to be as good as we can get. Not a God who builds walls or who sows division among the people. Not a God who wants to charge lepers a copay or take everything from a hemorrhaging woman. And not a God who recreates the violent, racist, impoverishing society that God's people have had to escape from over and over again. So we're here in Shreveport, a part of the We Must Do More tour, a part of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. We're here because this campaign is shifting the distorted, the false moral narrative that blames poor people for all of society's problems, that pits us against each other, and feeds us this lie of scarcity when we're really living in a world of abundance. The Poor People's Campaign is building power among the 140 million poor and low-income people. Those whose air and water are being poisoned, whose schools are being resegregated, whose housing is insecure, whose votes are being stolen, whose wages are too low, whose children are being locked up and left out, whose communities are being militarized, whose veterans are committing suicide. In the words of Frederick Douglass, those who would be free must strike the first blow. Those in pain know when their pain is relieved. Well, so many people here in Louisiana and across this country are in pain. We have endured many blows. Our people are suffering, and it's gone on for far too long, and we won't be silent anymore. The Poor People's Campaign is building up a powerful, multiracial, intergenerational, nonviolent army of the poor to break every chain of injustice. We are rising up for justice, rising up against racism, rising up against poverty, against the destruction of our planet and everything that lives on it. We're rising up against war and violence and an economy that spends 53 cents of every discretionary dollar on the war.
That's right.
And less than 15 cents on health care, on education, on anti-poverty programs, all combined. So we know that we have to do more. More mobilizing, more organizing, more registering, more educating people for a movement that votes. So the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, is a couple years old, and we launched with the largest and most expansive wave of nonviolent civil disobedience in U.S. history. Tens of thousands of people in 43 states and in Washington, D.C. took action together, cried out, everybody's got a right to live. Everybody has voting rights. Everybody needs health care. And we organized, and then we came to Washington, D.C. for a call to action rally, and we marched to the Capitol, and we delivered our demands. Then we went back to D.C. this past June for a Poor People's Moral Action Congress, where we launched the Poor People's Moral Budget. Everybody has a right to live. Where we had policymakers and researchers, theologians and poor people doing research together, finding that if we have a fair taxing system, if we cut the spending on military and make our country even safer, and if we invest in things like healthcare and living wage jobs and education, we could improve the lives of almost everybody in this country. We have a saying in this campaign: when we lift from the bottom, everybody rises. Can you all say that with me? When you lift from the bottom, everybody rises. One more time. If you lift from the bottom, everybody rises. It's true. It's true. The Bible says it's true. Our Constitution says it's true. History says it's true. And we are saying it's true. So at this Congress, we held the largest forum with presidential candidates in this election season. And we posed in front of all those front runners the real issues of people here in Shreveport, across Louisiana, across this country. We testified at the House Budget Committee. We brought the stories and the solutions from people who are impacted by the lack of health care, whose children have died in their arms because they didn't have life-giving medicine, whose kids are being threatened with being taken away from them because of their immigration status, because they don't have water in their homes. People who have raw sewage in their yards. Kids who have to be on a CPAP machine just to breathe. Diseases that have been eradicated are coming back. And people told their stories and they brought the solutions. They said, it doesn't have to be this way. This isn't right. This isn't just. This can change. And the power of people coming together is going to change it. But when we gathered with those candidates, when we testified with our politicians, many of us heard the same tired stereotypes. Many of us heard, well, you're just asking for too much. But we responded that we are going to build the power to make those in power say yes when they may be desirous of saying no. What we shared with Congress and what we're sharing with communities across this country is that if we transition to automatic online voter registration, it would be less money than just the top 2 contributors to the last election. We can do this. When we get a $15 minimum wage enacted immediately, that means 49 million workers are going to have a combined $328 billion a year, and they're going to invest it back in their community. If we invest less than $25 billion a year into education, we could boost academic performance of our kids. And that's less money than it's costing to build another wall at the U.S.-Mexico border. What Dr. King said, and something that we follow, is that power for poor people will really mean having the ability, the togetherness, the assertiveness, and the aggressiveness to be able to change the power structures. Well, we are building that. And we're here in Louisiana, and we have demands. And we're going to Washington, D.C. on June 20th, 2020 for a mass Poor People's Assembly and Moral March on Washington, and we're bringing those demands. We demand an end to racist gerrymandering and redistricting. We demand an end to placing persons on the federal bench who have a record of standing against voting rights. We demand automatic voter registration at the age of 18, early voting in every state, same-day registration, the right to vote for the currently and formerly incarcerated now. We demand the rights of all workers to form and join unions. We demand equal pay for equal work. We demand a guaranteed annual income. We demand fully funded anti-poverty programs that protect the welfare of all. We demand housing programs to ensure that all people have a place to call home. A place to call home. How is it that we have 6 empty houses for every homeless person in this country? How is it that we throw away more food than it takes to feed everyone? How is it that we have some of the best medical equipment in the whole world and people are dying because they don't have health care? It doesn't have to be this way. We demand single-payer universal health care. We demand a fully funded public water and sanitation infrastructure that keeps these utilities and services public and under public control. We demand that wealthy corporations pay their fair share. Pay their fair share. We demand 100% clean, renewable energy. We demand a public jobs program that can transition to a green economy that will put millions of people in sustainable living wage jobs and help the earth. We demand an immigration system that instead of criminalizing people for trying to raise their families, prioritizes family reunification, keeps families together, and allows us all to build thriving communities in the country that we call home. We demand an end to federal programs that send military equipment and personnel into local and state communities. We demand the call to build a wall at the U.S.-Mexico border be ceased. We demand an end to military aggression and warmongering. We demand a stop to the privatization of the military budget. We demand a ban on assault rifles, a ban on easy access to firearms. We know what we must do. what the Poor People's Campaign is already doing. We are rising up for voting rights. We are rising up for workers' rights. We are rising up for health care for everyone, education for everyone now, clean water, clean air for everyone. We are rising up against white supremacy and systemic racism. We are rising up for peace. We are rising up to end poverty, to end racism, to end militarism. We are rising up for a moral revolution of values. We must rise up for the 20 veterans that commit suicide every day. We must rise up for the thousands of people who are homeless in this state, the millions who are homeless in this country. We must rise up and be at the mass Poor People's Assembly and Moral March on Washington. Rise up. 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 Because we believe that when we rise up, when we lift up, when we rise up from that bottom, everybody comes up with us. Amen.
Amen. And why must we rise up? We want you to see this video now from across the country. Would you play it at this time of what is already happening, and to put a face, hear the stories. We must be honest about the foundations of the political and economic systems we call America. I love America because of her potential, but I know that America will never even get close to being a more perfect nation until we are honest about the politics of rejection.
I want to tell you about some of the leaders who are building the Poor People's Campaign. Callie Greer from Selma, Alabama, who had to bury her daughter, Venus, because she didn't have health care.
I'm here today to share my daughter's Venus's story. Venus discovered a small lump in her breast and she wasn't insured. Venus had to be approved for every prescription and every piece of medical equipment that she needed. I'm standing here today in solidarity with the Poor People's Campaign because no one should have to bury their child in America because they don't have health care insurance.
I'm 46 years old. I've lived in poverty here in West Virginia every day of my life. And I'm working. I am working poor with a bachelor's degree. I'm doing the best I can with what I have.
I'm a second-generation fast food worker, and I've experienced the cycle of poverty firsthand. Growing up, I watched my mother endure long hours of back-breaking labor, doing everything she could to feed me and my sisters. My employer barely pays me enough to pay rent and utilities, let alone with the medical expenses with my mother.
I worked 41 years in the coal mines. I have black lung, and it's just unfathomable what these poor coal miners have to go through in order to get what they have worked for and deserve.
I'm a Vietnam veteran. My only chance of going to college was joining the Army.
It was one thing to know that you didn't have water and you couldn't afford your water. It's a whole nother to find out that they shut off your entire community and none of you matter.
But when I lost my housing, healthcare, and income all at the same time, I was terrified, panicked.
Kansas farmers are committing suicide at a far greater rate than the national average. They're usually in debt up to their eyeballs because they can't pay for all the equipment that it takes to run a farm. Many can't afford to buy health insurance.
Hi, my name is Pamela Roach. I'm from Lowndes County, Alabama, and I live in a mobile home with my 2 kids. And I got raw sewage. I don't have no money on power. And I have to travel back and forth to Birmingham to take my daughter with the CPAP machine. Don't have a car and don't have no way to take her.
This is the largest encampment in Aberdeen. There's about 1,000 people in a town of 16,000 who are homeless.
In my community, we were all shut off for the day because none of us could afford our water bills. In the past, my family wasn't able to afford electricity in the winter. It was very hard on all of us.
But the indigenous people in the surrounding communities that are being affected, we talk about health care. We talk about worrying about the environment, but yet when they're allowing open pit mines and letting it leak into the land, into the water, the high rate of cancer and the high bills of health is going to continue to raise because of corporations and greeds and politicians that don't want to listen.
There's a new chemical company that's producing another carcinogen. In our community, it's amazing the people who just started dying of cancer. And when my wife was diagnosed with cancer, I was amazed at the black women that would ring our doorbell and walk in the door and pull a wig off to show my wife that I have it too.
This wall, this is sin of the highest order.
When there are 38 million poor children, when 60% of African Americans are poor, when 65% of Latinx are poor, when 40% of Asians are poor, when there are 67 million poor white people, we must say, this is not right.
Somebody's hurting our people, and it's gone on far too long, and we won't be silent anymore.
Our brothers and sisters are sleeping on the streets. For a country this rich to have so many people poor, it's immoral and it's wrong.
Our backs are against the wall, and we got no choice but to push.
We lift our voices for justice. We put our bodies on the line for mercy. And together we will proclaim liberty throughout the land for the enslaved, for the poor, and for us all.
Follow that breaking news in Albany, where a large group of protesters have moved into the street.
Washington Avenue between City Hall and Lark Street closed down.
Protesters with the Poor People's Campaign of Indiana.
2 o'clock on the East Coast, 2 o'clock in the middle, 2 o'clock on the West Coast. A wave, and the historians tell us it's never happened before.
Our communities, Muslim communities, who have joined the Poor People's Campaign, you can count on us.
Our democracy is in trouble. Our democracy is in trouble. And we come to demand.
Second warning.
Because it's crucial that we make ourselves heard. No one is listening. We write letters, we make calls. No one is listening. So we gotta find a way to make ourselves heard.
We are the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. And we are here. We are poor. We are clergy. And we're here to say to our nation's capital and to the highest court of this land that everybody has a right to live. Everybody has a right to learn. Everybody has a right to love. Everybody has a right to living wages. Everybody has a right to vote. Everybody has a right to thrive in this society.
Everybody say, "I!"
I believe that we will win. I believe that we will win. I believe that we will win. Freedom fighter, and he taught us how to fight.
The poor and their clergy. We read Article 6 of the Kentucky State Constitution that says we have a right to free assembly.
We are demanding that we stop the war on our poor.
We demand the right
there will be a movement that will break through the con and bring people together to save the heart and the soul of this democracy and this world.
All over the country it's happening. And Shreveport is a part of it, right? In Louisiana. At this time, I want to do a couple of things. Prepare. Take out your cell phones or get a young person that knows how to use it to take it out for you. And if you would text the word moral, M-O-R-A-L, to 90975. M-O-R-A-L, 90975. We want to connect everybody to what's going on to this in this movement. 90975. I have friends in this audience. I see the mayor who came in. Thank you so much. Are you a part of, I know Southern mayors have written this letter. You one of them too? That's right. There's a powerful letter that African American Southern mayors have written to all the candidates saying that no longer do you just come in and say, vote for me and vote for them. They say, we want to see what you're going to do for our communities. And so I want to celebrate those mayors that have decided it's not the good old boy network no more. There's some new crowd in town now. And they want to know what's going to happen. And good to see you, brother, always. Y'all do that? Did you text it? Did you get something back real quick? Okay. The second thing I want to do before we come forward is I want you to look around, because I think still some of us are kind of sitting with folk we used to. And I know even in the choir, I don't see enough diversity. So we're going to put some diversity up here, okay? Because we're real serious. We're not going to win separated. It's going to take all of us, huh? Your statistics hurting everybody. So are there any people of Latino descent that sing? Or any white folk that sing? Huh? Come on, I need you in the choir. If there's one, I need you to come up. I'll make room for. Is there another? All right, y'all make room. And don't worry about it. Whatever song we sing, you can catch on it in about 2 seconds, all right? Then I want to ask other folk to just stand for a second. Organist, if you would play a little bit. And I want you to deliberately look down your row and see if you can adjust anywhere or invite somebody to come sit with you so it looks like the broadness. I know we may have come in here with some folk and we sat down, but we're just creatures of habit. But if there's anybody, if you see 4 black folks sitting together, go break it up and sit in there with them. You see 3 white folks sitting together, break it up and go say, come in, wait a minute, I'm breaking up this. I'm gonna come in here and sit with you and I'm gonna get to know you. Because we're gonna go up together or we're gonna stay down together, right? Come on, that's right, my brother. We're gonna break this thing up a little bit. Yeah, he said, I wanna get in the middle, that's right. Anybody else? If we got it? Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome today. Can we do that one time together, black and white together? Black and brown, Asian, and Indian. Black and white. Brown, Asian, and native. Black and white. Together today. Not someday, today. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe that we will overcome today. Now they told me when you sing that song, you gotta stand at least one verse, and you gotta hook up together. We will overcome. Oh, we shall overcome hook up. Oh, we shall overcome today. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome today. Put your hands together. We'll celebrate our togetherness tonight. Now, we call these moral revivals and mass meetings because we have testifiers, but it's a different kind of testifying. We have people to tell their stories. And when they tell their stories, at the end of it, we say, somebody's hurting our people. It's gone on far too long, and we won't be silent anymore. So we want to invite the local Poor People's Campaign leaders here, Omare Hosang, Beth Jones, and Dr. Lou Russell. They're first going to come and tell us why they're joining up. Now, this lady right here is really in more control than I am because she has the cards. We try to keep this at a certain time because we have audiences from everywhere. People know, so we ask you to honor her when she says time to wrap up. And then after them, they're going to introduce the 3 other testifiers that will come. Am I right? Am I supposed to give this to you? Yes. Oh.
Thank you.
Give her a big hand.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, good evening, good evening. It means so much to me to see you all here tonight. I mean, wow. So this part, we're supposed to talk about why we need to do more. So I'm going to hand the mic over to my colleagues, Dr. Lou and Beth, and then I'm going to introduce the testifiers.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. I'm Beth Jones. With the organizing committee in Louisiana. And for people in Louisiana, it's probably clear that we need to do more, a lot more. Mobilizing, organizing, registering, and educating the people of Louisiana, because the people here are poor. We're struggling. We need to vote. We need to come out. The recent primary elections were pretty bad. And we need to get out and vote and change things. And we need to register people for the general election coming up and make sure that we get the seats that we have left, because otherwise things are gonna get worse and worse. And we need to get out there and talk to people and let them know that the only way things can change is if we vote and if we do things and if we take action. And so that's why we're here to do more. And I'll turn it over to Dr. Lou.
God bless you, everybody. Come on, put your hands together. Can we give the Lord a hand clap of praise? Glory to his name. I am a part of the coordinating committee of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for more revival here in Louisiana. And there is not only a need, but a must that we do more. Many of you remember the fight for Medicaid expansion. We were on the front line of that fight. Over 400 people have gained insurance coverage. 484,000 are still without coverage. But we do, and we have made progress. One of the reasons we need to do more is because one of the candidates for governor has stated that he will freeze the program. And you may think, well, being frozen don't mean a whole lot. At least the people that are in the program are in. But we know that poor people generally, me, myself included, we have an income that goes up and down. I'm a small business owner. There are times when I've got money rolling, but there are slow seasons when we don't. Many of them are seasonal workers, which means they're in and out of the program because it is tied to their earnings. Therefore, when they earn a little more, they roll off the rolls of insurance. When their income goes down, they roll back into the rolls. But a freeze will mean there will only be a one-way exit. Because when they exit out, the freeze will mean there is no way to come back in. 70% of the people covered by insurance are seasonal workers. We give it about 2 years and the program will be defunct anyway. We've got to do more. Somebody say we've got to do more in Louisiana. In Louisiana. Mobilizing, organizing, registering, educating. We need every one of you. It's going to take all of us if we're going to make a difference. And we're regressing on every front. The other criteria that has come forth in the discussion in the House is a work requirement for food stamps. I have no problem with an able-bodied person getting a job, if there's a job for them to have. The problem we have is there are no jobs. The other problem, if they live in a rural area, there is not transportation. So if I can't get to the job, if there is no job, maybe I'm sick. Does that mean that I cannot, as I heard Reverend Liz Theo Harris say, does that mean that I cannot partake in just having my needs met? Everybody deserves the right to live.
Thank you, Dr. Lou. So, I've been to about 3 voter mobilization meetings in the past 3 days. And in every meeting I go to, I'm asked the question, or the question is asked, how can we connect the gap between people being registered to vote and going to vote? Yes. And I've been, that question has really boggled my mind because I don't have an answer. And in those rooms with people who do this work, they didn't have an answer. So my only response is this. If we are really, really serious about making the changes that we must make, and we acknowledge that voting is one of those ways, then every hand must be on deck. Every person in this community must do something, even if it's a little bit. So I turned to my folks and I asked, who is willing to tell their story before maybe a room of strangers? Your stories of your experiences of being poor. It's hard for many people in the community to even acknowledge that we are poor. And 3 folks accepted my call to come and testify before you all. And so it is my honor, and I feel blessed to call you all my comrades. And I would like to introduce you all. They will talk about the 4 evils and how they've impacted their lives, from systemic racism to poverty to ecological devastation to the war economy. The first person that will testify is Caitlin Douglas. The second person to testify is Ophi James. And the last person that will testify is Francis Kelly. Come on, Caitlin.
Thank you, Omar. Good evening, everyone. First, thank you to everybody for gathering and allowing young people's voices to be heard. I am 25 years old. I stay in District F in Forest Oaks, which is one of the most economically depleted areas in this city. I, as a child, was very gifted to be able to learn quickly and to be able to pick up on things and to have multiple abilities and multiple creative avenues to be able to push me further. But that was not because my family had money. Had my grandmother not been the cafeteria manager for Caddo Parish School Boards for 25 years, and had she not had direct access to the knowledge of the opportunities for me to be able to test up a grade, or to be able to test into magnet schools, or to be able to be in gifted programs, I would not be before you today. My first thoughts of suicide as a poor Black child in Shreveport, Louisiana was at 7 years old, because my teachers did not know how to challenge a young Black and gifted student in a poor community. That's number one. When I went from being the top student in elementary school, middle school, and high school to having to take remedial math courses in college. I was the top 4 student in my class at Southwood High School in the 9th grade. And in college, I had to take remedial math courses. Today, I am a community liaison for the arts in the Black arts community in Shreveport, and they're my friends who are artists, who are singers, dancers, rappers, painters, visual artists, and some of the most creative and progressive people in this community who we need here to help this economy grow and to thrive are leaving and going to Dallas and to New Orleans, and they are not being supported here at home because they don't have the resources. And there are opportunities that exist, but where is the transparency and the knowledge of how to get those resources? Where is the transparency? Where is the call to action for our own young Black and thriving economy here? We are drowning in student loan debt, but we have an industrial tax exemption program that is allowing entities like Calumet to poison our community. O.M.O.R.E and I went to canvass our community, my community, and we went to canvass on voters' education. And instead of them expressing about what they wanted to see more in the education system, they said they wanted to see Calumet leave because they were poisoning our community, because these people are getting cancer left and right. So my challenge to everybody in this room is to embrace a young person and to uplift this community. The only way that we are going to progress is if we give these young people who want to thrive the knowledge of these resources that are available to them. And if they won't give it to us, then we take it from them, or we create the opportunities for ourselves. That's really all I have to say, and thank you so much.
Say, somebody's hurting our children, and it's gone on far too long, and we won't be silent anymore.
Hey, I am Ophie, and I'm speaking to you guys from an educator's point of view. I'm a music teacher at an elementary school, so I work with pre-K through 5th grade. Now, I'm speaking to you guys about poverty, and I'm gonna mention systematic racism in a minute, just a little. But I just wanted to make you guys aware of something called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I have never been good at pronouncing that word. Hierarchy of needs. So basically, Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a diagram, it's a triangle. And it explains what people, not just kids, what people need to be people, to be happy. So at the bottom is the physical needs, the food, the shelter, what keeps you alive. Right above that is safety. Safety and security, where do I live? Am I safe? Above that is belongingness and love, being around friends, being around family. And then above that is esteem. That's respect, self-esteem, recognition. This is the, in class, oh, you did a great job, and you feel good. And then at the top is self-actualization. So that's becoming who you are gonna be. So the point I'm making is the way Maslow's theory works, the stuff at the top, the part that the kids learn, the esteem, the wanting to be something, they can't get there, and I'm talking about kids. They can't get there if their bottom part is not met. So I've worked in a school that was, that I had some kids who dealt with poverty. And not just at the school I worked at, but everywhere. No child, you cannot expect a child to want to learn if they're hungry. They don't want to listen to their teacher if they're dealing with systematic racism and they don't trust their teacher. And that's just something I want to make everyone aware of, because, they say kids are our future. And it's our responsibility, to be honest, it's our responsibility to make sure our kids are fed, warm, safe, because a 5-year-old can't feed themselves, to be honest. So this is why I'm very behind everything going on with the Poor People's Campaign, because I'm directly seeing what our situation is doing to our younger people. And if we have smarter kids, those smarter kids will become smarter adults who will really make a change in this city. Thank you.
Somebody's hurting our people, and it's gone on far too long, and we won't be silent anymore.
Hi, my name is Frances Kelly. Thank you so much for having me speak today. When I moved back here, I felt really pessimistic about the ability to do environmental organizing in Louisiana. I have environment and immigration, so I'm going to try to keep it brief. But I want to start off with a victory. About 4 years ago, we had a huge victory here, and many of y'all were a part of that. We stopped a plan by the EPA, Department of Defense, and the state of Louisiana under Governor Jindal to open burn 15 million pounds of hazardous waste at Camp Minden. We did that. They had signed a legally binding agreement, and we made them stop. And so if that can be done in Northwest Louisiana, that can be done anywhere. It's still having repercussions. We're going to end open burning nationally. We're going to get a detonation chamber in Vieques, Puerto Rico, where they have open burning, and in many, many communities across the U.S. But I have an action for that. The incinerator that we brought in, it's supposed to leave. So if you can get out your phone and enter Governor Edwards' phone number, and please call him tomorrow and tell him the incinerator has got to go. It's 225-342-0911. 991, sorry, and that is the constituent service number. It's 225-342-0991, and the incinerator has got to go. When I first started thinking about environmental organizing, I thought that pollution was something that happened out there, and it was something that maybe affected a frog or an owl or an eagle or something, but there is no way. These toxic chemicals we're putting in the environment, they're in our bodies. Our children today are born pre-polluted. You cannot take an umbilical cord blood sample anywhere in the world and not find man-made chemicals in their blood that did not exist 150 years ago. And that's just something that we should all keep in mind. We're living a science experiment. And those who are on frontline communities, poor communities, communities of color, they've got more. They've got more health effects from that. There's over 80,000 chemicals in commercial production every year, and we only have full toxicity testing for a few hundred. So we don't even know what we're doing to ourselves. I want to say one thing about the economy of this state and how this relates to environmental work, and then I'm going to move on to immigration. Our economy is based on oil and gas, and it has been for decades. And everywhere else in the country, almost, and everywhere else in the world, people are moving to clean energy because it's now cheaper. It makes financial sense to move to clean energy. And if we do not change what we're doing in this state and invest in those clean energy jobs of the future, we're not going to have those energy jobs anymore. We're not going to have those good jobs, and we've got to wrap our head around that. So just to move on to the environmental work. Sorry. So many of you may already know this. Okay.
But I want to ask a question, because one of the things that we try to do in these testimonies is, and I wanted to ask each of you this, but I'll ask it once, it's not just the problem, Jennifer, but we want to get people, I'm speaking about organizers too, who can say how it has affected them. So how has this environmental pollution affected you?
Well,
that's the stories we want the nation to hear, and I want to keep saying that to the organizers. That is so critical in this section of the program. How's it affected you or members of your family?
well, it makes me wonder if it makes sense for me to stay in Louisiana. It makes me wonder what it means to have a kid with the climate crisis, and knowing that every parish in Louisiana is high risk for lead pollution, lead exposure for children, and that only 15% of kids in Caddo Parish are tested, and the state law that they should be. And just thinking about like what kind of community that is to grow up in, where you cannot protect yourself, you cannot protect your kids from toxic pollution, and you may not even know that it's happening.
Thank you. So somebody's poisoning our community. Let me have my camera. And it's gone on far too long, and we won't be silent anymore. I want that to sink in just a little bit. And if y'all see me, I'm favoring an old football need. Don't worry about it. And because it's important to put faces on the facts, right? As we tell these stories. Reverend, that doesn't move over, does it? That doesn't move over. So I'm going to try to find a way. Can you all see me over there? I'm going to sit down over here. But I need to make sure, or do I need to come out there? You sure? If I sit on my stool? Okay, all right, okay. Because as we talk across the nation tonight about what's going on, and that's just a sample, what you just saw, of people talking, but telling their stories. One of the things that we are clear about in this nation, Reverend, the Bible says that in Amos chapter 5, God says, if I can get a remnant, he doesn't say if I can get everybody. God says, if I can get a remnant that will go in the streets and cry and shut down the factories and shut down the street. This is the Message Bible translation. God says, then I'll make a visit. And one of the things we have to have in this moment, because as Liz said, we have all the wherewithal. We just don't have the moral will and the consciousness as a nation to do what's needed to be done. And in order to do that, we have to put a face on the facts. A face on the facts. That these are real people. When we quote these numbers, we're talking about real people. Not people on the margins, but real people. Now, Liz told you all what we are fighting for. What we're fighting for. My job is to talk tonight to the nation and to you about why we're fighting for those things. And hopefully to make you just a tad bit mad. No, angry. I don't want you mad. I want you angry, because anger comes from the word and grief. It means to grieve. Now, I'm not going to tell you to be angry and sin. There's a way to be angry and not sin, but you have to have a certain righteous indignation. Dr. King, people talk about his love, but they don't talk about his righteous indignations. You have to have an eternal discontent with injustice. Huh? Because any conviction of faith or consciousness that does not resolve or evolve into a quarrel with the world cannot be claimed to be spiritual. It's something, but it ain't no spiritual conviction unless it ensues in you a quarrel with the world. That's why Jesus in Matthew 23 said, when he talked about hypocrites, he said, woe unto those who do all this religious stuff, but they leave undone the weightier matters of the law, which is justice, kindness, and faithfulness. That's Matthew 23:23. So we need to really understand what's going on. Did you know that there are 140 million people in this country that are poor and low wealth? Now think about that. A lot of times we talk about, they say 39 million, but that's using the government standard of poverty, which is 40 years old. If you actually look at poverty and who is $300 away from an emergency and who would be poor, who would be in extreme poverty without some of the help that they're receiving, over 140 million. That's 43% of this nation. Real people now, 43% of this nation. That's 39 million children. That's 60% of all black people. That's why, Pastor, I tell pastors, I can do that. And, you know, I've been a pastor now for 30-some years. I've consecrated as a bishop, and I go places sometime, and I'll tell pastors, it is a shame and a disgrace for you to ask people to tithe and ask people to give your pastor's anniversary. You won't fight for them to have a living wage when, when 60% of your people, black people, are poor and low wealth, 23 million people, and it's a shame and disgrace for black politicians or white politicians to get elected to office and then forget the people who are on the margin. I was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin the other day, Mayor, and I hope that this would never happen in Shreveport or under your leadership, and they're having the convention coming to Milwaukee, and I want you to help me call I don't know what your party is, that doesn't matter to me, but call the Democrats and tell them they better just stop this. And so they are moving the homeless camp so that the people coming to the Democratic convention won't see them. Don't you know that's sin? Huh? They're moving the folk that live up under the underpass to clean up the city so that people won't see them. I guess the folk, and they do that on the Republican side too, it's almost as though if we don't see them, then we don't have to do anything. But God sees them, and God sees you. 64% of Latino people are poor and low wealth, 38 million. 60% of indigenous people are poor and low wealth, that's 2.1 million. 40% of Asians, 8 million Asians. And even though only about 30% of whites are poor percentage-wise, that's 66 million people. There are 40 million more poor white people than there are black in raw numbers. That's why we can't keep talking about poverty as just being a black or people of color. It is. The impact of poverty is because it hurts more black people in terms of the full percentage. But in raw numbers, more white people are poor. And the largest number of poor people in this country are white women and children and the disabled. White women and children and the disabled. And that's not some figment of our imagination. And that ought to bother us. Did you know, we go in the street when an extremist, racist cop shoots one person. And we should. If somebody shoots an unarmed black man or woman, we should march. We should challenge that, because to have a gun and a badge and a right to serve you a warrant and take you out of your house is too much power for a racist, right? But watch this. 250,000 people die every year from poverty. 600 people a month. 150 people a week die from the policies that keep poverty alive. 7 people died from vaping. You know, maybe I shouldn't do it that way, I should do it this way, because y'all know. But some of y'all knew what I was talking about when I did it like this. Because that's how you made it through. It won't just prayer. Hallelujah. And by the way, we ought to be kind of pissed off, and I use words like this about that too, that we got all these folk in prison who sold that stuff. Now folk are selling it legally, and they got strawberry, raspberry, and they don't go to jail. I mean, think about the wrongness of that. But anyway, 7 people died from vaping, and we called it a national emergency. 150 people die every week from poverty. And most politicians don't even use the word when they run for office. They won't even say the word poverty and low wealth. We got to put a face on the facts. That's why we're mobilized. That's why we're going to D.C. Did you know now that's national. Let's check out Louisiana. How many, 50% of all the people in Louisiana are poor and low wealth. Think about that. Not 10%, not 20%, 50%, according to studies done by Columbia University, Harvard, and other places. 50%, 2.3 million residents are poor and low wealth. There are more people poor and low wealth than those that voted. If poor and low wealth people get together in this state and vote, they can change any election. In fact, if we're doing a study now to show if just 2%, not 20, if 2% of poor and low wealth people who haven't been voting were to vote, they can fundamentally shift the elections in almost any state. Now, 57% of all the children in this state are poor and low wealth. 57%. I didn't say black, I said children. 1.2 million people of color, 1 million white. 67 million people of color are poor in Louisiana. 38% of white people are poor and low wealth in Louisiana, but that's only 200,000 different in Louisiana. From 1979 to 2012, the income for the top 1% in Louisiana grew by 184%, while the income for the bottom 99 only increased by 4%. Now turn to your neighbor and say, he's preaching now. Because the Bible says, in all you're getting, get understanding. See, I think some of the reasons why people aren't mobilizing is because they have not been politicized. They don't know. Huh? And that's why this campaign teaches. We don't just rile people up. I can do all of that, but we teach because we want folk to be informed activists, right? There's no law in this state protecting discrimination against gay people. Now all of us ought to be bothered by that. No, I know it for a while. I understand. There's nobody say nothing about that. But, you know, that's talking about your cousins and your church members. Because you really don't know. Because you don't have your ushers at the door asking folk who they was with yesterday. Because if you did, you'd have a fight every Sunday at your door. And, I mean, what, you know, y'all ready to throw away Langston Hughes? Y'all ready to throw away Lorraine Hansberry? You ready to throw away Richard Wright? You ready to throw away, what's his name? Who? James Baldwin? You ready to throw away Bayard Rustin, who was the one that organized the March on Washington? And the last thing black folk ought to be doing is allowing discrimination to take place against anybody. I tell folk when they tell me, Reverend Barber, I don't know about you. I said, well, you know, I really do want to talk about sex. I love talk about sex. But the sex I want to talk about is the illicit relationship between the Supreme Court and big business and corrupt politicians that produces all of these bad bills in the back rooms and in the back seats. Huh? Somebody said, well, I don't like gay folk, I don't like same-sex marriage. Well, don't marry nobody then same-sex. But you ought not be wanting, you ought not want the country, because if you ever allow discrimination against one, you open what's called setting a legal precedent. And when you set a legal precedent, it allows. Now you say, why? Because first of all, the same people that don't like gay people also don't like voting rights. Check their voting records. If you follow any politician that's always loud against gay people, most of the time if you follow them long enough, you'll find out they're gay too. But they're loud. And the same thing with a lot of the preachers. You know, you got to be loud, 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 loud. And then you find out after a while, don't mess with me, I'm just as crazy. Huh? You know. You even got some preachers that say, they know their organ is gay, they know their requirement, but if they can sing or play, or if they give money. But here's my point. The same people that are against gay people are against voting rights, are against living wages, are against health care. The same folk. Check the voting right records. Did you know that in Louisiana, 68,000 black folk, adults, are disenfranchised due to felony voting restrictions? There are 35,000 people in prison in this state, and 67% of them are people of color. We got to put a face on that, y'all. We got to build some stages where we show that. We don't just talk about it, we put a face on it. Did you know from this state, 230,000 people were deported between 2003 and 2017? Louisiana has the 4th highest total of all 50 states. We talking about what's happening in Texas. What's happening right here? Huh? Did you know in this state, militarism and the war economy, you heard Liz say we spend 53 cents of every discretionary dollar on war economy and only 15 cents on education, healthcare, and infrastructure. People are making a killing off of killing. And most combat soldiers, the average combat soldier makes less than $35,000 a year. The money is not going to the soldiers, it's going to military contractors who are making war instruments of war that the generals aren't even asking for. We could cut our military budget in this country by half to $350 billion a year, and our budget would still be bigger than China, North Korea, Iran, and Russia combined. And Dr. King warned us about any country that would ultimately be driven by its military budget was on a downward spiral. $308 billion was spent on defense from Louisiana. $2.1 billion went to defense contractors, which means only about $1.7 billion went to the soldiers. In Louisiana, you have 88,000, any veterans in here? You got 88,000 veterans in Louisiana whose incomes are below $35,000. While the average defense contractor CEO makes $19 million a year. And most of them never go to the battlefield. But the soldiers that go, and when you talk like this, you're not anti the military. My daddy was in the Navy. It's not anti the military, it's anti folk lying and saying they care about the veterans when what they really care about is making money off of war. They making a killing off of killing. In Louisiana, you heard my dear sister say, even with this Medicaid expansion, 484,000 plus people are insured. For every 500,000 people that are uninsured, 2,800 people die. So that means last year alone, somewhere around 2,000 people died in Louisiana. And I'm in the church, but let me tell you this, and it was not because God called them home. Now, God welcomed them home, but God didn't call them home. They are dead because of government policy murder. The reason I know that is because everybody that gets elected to the Congress from Louisiana, the moment they get elected, they get free health care paid for by you. The governor gets free health care and lives in public housing, just like the president. And it is a sin and disgrace for you to get elected and you get some things that you don't even want the people that elected you to have. Did you know almost 30% of the census tracts in Louisiana are at risk for being able to afford water? 30% of where water is, folk can't even afford to buy water. And the 4.9 million barrel Deepwater Horizon BP oil spill off the coast of Louisiana was responsible for 95% of all the offshore oil spilled between 1964 and 2015. If you add up all the other spills from 64 to 2015, what happened here in 2010 that's still affecting, was greater than what happened all those years. There are 3,000 plus people homeless in Louisiana. And in Louisiana, if you work a job, see, we have to come to a new understanding as well. It used to be, folks say, I got you. It used to be if you worked, people said, well, you're not poor. That's not true. Never really was. Because how many of y'all know some folk in your family that worked and they were still poor? Right? That's a whole nother story. But there are 3,000 people homeless. In Louisiana, you have to work 89 hours a week to afford a 2-bedroom apartment. Did you hear what I said? I didn't say 49 hours. 89 hours a week. And in Louisiana, 896,000 people go to work every day and make less than a living wage. That's 50% of your workforce, 49% of this workforce. 49% of the folk go to work every day and they make less than a living wage. Some of them have to live in their cars. Some of them have to choose between medicine and food, and they work every day. Every day. I was in a city, and we came to a place and it had a pathway down in the woods, and it was in front of a church, and the church had on its sign, "Gay folk are going to hell." But 300 yards down in the woods was a homeless camp. That church wasn't doing nothing about that, but they were sending folk to hell. They thought maybe they might go to hell. But we walked down in that pathway, and we found black, white, and brown people in a homeless camp. A woman was there who had been middle class. She was white. She had a tragic health issue come up, and now she's homeless, living in the woods. A black man was down there, Reverend, who went to work every day, but he didn't make enough to afford a home, so he lived in the woods at night and went to work during the day. These stories are real all across this country, and we must put a face on them. These are not other folk. This is us. This is America in this country, in this state. 1%, you talk, Trump comes down here and brags about how he's helped everybody, telling all those lies. You know, he's told 13,000 lies. Now, I would never be one to say I ain't never lied. And ain't nobody here can say you ain't never lied. And the truth is, you lied some since yesterday. And you don't need to call it no little lie. You told a lie. You know goodness well you told somebody you were feeling all right and your toes hurting and everything else. But 13,000? And then the folk that's enabling him, they're helping him lie. See, it's not so much Trump as it is the folk enabling. And Trump is not really the problem. He's a symptom of a problem. Trump benefited from years and years of political treachery and political pathology, building up what folk call the Southern strategy, right? That was designed to do what we saw happen in 2018. But did you know that only 1% of Louisiana residents will receive, 1% of Louisiana residents will receive 32% of the benefits of the new tax law? But their average tax cut in 2027 will be $5,000+. But the poorest 20% are going to have to pay $190 to $200 more. Louisiana has spent at least $15 billion on subsidies for corporations, giving corporations tax cuts and tax breaks. And what bothers me a lot of times about that is we don't get anything. You know, we don't, when they do it in North Carolina too, they give these companies this free money. They don't have to guarantee they're gonna build up poor communities. They don't have to guarantee they're gonna have so many black people in the hierarchy of their organization. They don't have to guarantee they're gonna pay a living wage. They just get free money. Because some people believe $725, as long as you got a job, that's fine. But see, I look at it from a different perspective. As part African American, see, it took us from 0 to 400 to get to $725. See, this is the 400th year anniversary of slavery. Slavery was 0, full employment, but 0. Full employment, but 0. So it took us from 0 to 400 to get to 725. I don't want to hear nobody else talking about wait to get to 15. We waited long enough. 400 years is long enough. So my brothers and sisters, why are we doing more? Why are we going to these 25 states? Why are we saying we have to have the massive Poor People's Assembly and Moral March on Washington? Why? Because we've got to build a stage and put a face on these facts. We're not talking about going to Washington, D.C. so that a bunch of folk can stand up and say they fight for the poor. We're talking about having poor and low-income people from Louisiana and Texas and Alabama speaking for themselves. We have to build a stage that the whole world, the whole country will have to see. We got to tell the truth about what's going on. And that it doesn't have to be this way. We don't have to still keep treating native and indigenous people as wards of the nation and giving them casinos but won't put housing and schools on those reservations. Something wrong with that. There are 14 million families who can't afford water. We can address this. All this money we're spending on prisons, do you know we spend 10 times more on prisons than we did in 1976. It has increased 10 times. 10 times. We put more money in prison when we know that $1 on the front end of life would save us $10, $15 on the back end of life. And it's not going to change until we have a movement of the people. Did you know that the Defense Department has reported 95% of the growth in the incarcerated population since 2000 is from people who can't afford bail? Did you know that we have more than 800 military bases around the world? And what we could do by cutting that money, still be safe, but also build up. Rome did not fall from without. Rome fell from within. Rome fell because the Caesars and the generals put more money in military and conquest than they did in building up the lives of people, and it crumbled from within. You heard Liz say 49 million people. If we paid $15 an hour, 49 million people would immediately be at a living wage, $328 billion. There's 62 million poor and low wealth, 62 million people who work for less than a living wage. And we can change. In fact, the living wage ought to be $20 an hour. If you actually do the math and deal with inflation as well, it really ought to be somewhere around $20. And if we repeal the Trump tax cuts, we can have $886 billion a year. We've given trillions of dollars to Wall Street crooks, and we as a nation have bailed out the banks, and they claim that banks were too big to fail. Well, communities full of God's creation are too blessed to be burdened with racism and poverty and ecological devastation and the war economy. If we just put an annual tax on the 75 wealthiest households, we could generate $275 billion a year, more than enough to employ 2.5 million people. I guess as you notice by now, this movement is not trying to be loud and wrong. We've done our research. We got one report called The Souls of Poor Folk. It's been put together by some of the best economists, historian people in this country. We got another one called The Moral Budget for America. Some of the best economists, sociologists, and think tanks put it together, because the worst thing you can be is loud and wrong. They said we don't have the money. We found the money. They say we have to raise taxes. No, you don't. You don't have to raise taxes. You just have to get the wealthiest and the richest to pay their fair share. You don't have to raise any taxes. And why are we saying June 20th? Say June 20th, 2020. Why then? Because that's number one, June 20th is one day before the summer solstice. The summer solstice is when the light is the brightest on the earth. So we want the light to be on poverty and the light to be on injustice on June 20th, 21st. But also June 20th, 2020 is after the primary, so we'll know who's running, both sides of the aisle, but it's before the conventions. No need to have a big gathering after the convention. If you're going to impact the convention, you want to have a big gathering before the convention. You want to put your agenda out before the convention. You want them to have to deal with your agenda before the convention. Why June 2020? Because we want to nationalize states. This country doesn't change from D.C. down, it changes from Shreveport up. Huh? Look at history. The country changed when Montgomery changed. The country changed when Birmingham changed. Huh? The country changes from the bottom up. Huh? There were some deacons down here in Louisiana called the deacons of defense, and some changed too. But it didn't come from down, it came from up, from the bottom. It didn't come from the top, it came from the bottom. Justice, a reimagination of what is just, must always come from the bottom. That's why Jesus said, I've come to speak good news to the poor in the power of the Spirit. We must do more. We must do more. What do we need you to do? In this city and in this Poor People's Campaign, Doctor, we need to connect 30,000 people online to this campaign. That's why I gave you that text message. Why? You said 30,000, that ain't nothing. But in 43 states, that's 1.3 million people. And that's power. That's power. We need Louisiana to do your part and help us connect 30,000 people, right? Then we need every city, every county to bring a bus. We don't have to have 5 buses from Shreveport. We just need a bus. A bus from Shreveport, a bus from New Orleans, a bus from this parish, a bus from, just a bus. There got to be a bus. There got to be 45 people. Or get on the train. Get a bus full on the train. But if that happens all across every church bring a bus, every mosque bring a bus, every synagogue bring a bus, a couple of churches hook up, bring a bus. Come to Louisiana, because when you get there, you're going to hear impacted people speak. Not so much me, Liz, and a bunch of other folk, but impacted people. Not only telling their stories, but saying what the possibilities are before the whole world. And then, my friends, lastly, we must stay together and we must raise up a movement that will vote, and we must be the movement that says to politicians, sometimes the reason folk aren't voting is it's your fault. It ain't the people's fault. And the reason the people are not voting is because they don't ever hear their name. They don't ever hear their conditions. We got to help give some of these politicians some courage. Why in the world are you going to vote if you poor and the people don't talk about nothing but the middle class? If all they talk about is the middle class, and there's no prophetic possibility, there's no moral imagination, we're going to have to make politicians have the courage to talk about systemic racism. I'm not talking about the kind of racism when somebody calls you the N-word. I'm talking about voter suppression and resegregation of schools and mass incarceration issues. We're gonna have to make them talk about 140 million poor people. We're gonna have to make them talk about the fact that 4 million people get up every morning, they can buy unleaded gas and can't buy unleaded water. And if we look through history, it has always taken a movement. It took an abolition movement. It took a women's suffrage movement. It took the bonus marches of veterans who weren't getting paid what they would deserve in the 1930s. It took the civil rights movement. It took the peace. It's always taken a movement to push the politicians to start saying what they need to say so that people can hear themselves and see themselves, and then they are motivated to come out and vote because they believe it will make a difference. And so if I was home, in my home church, I would say at the end of the day, Paul gave us what we ought to hear. Paul said in Hebrews chapter 10, he was living in a time when there was this guy on the throne. There was a whole group of them. It wasn't just one person. They were called Caesars. They loved to lie. They hated revolutionaries. In fact, they crucified them. The Caesars I'm talking about. They love to put their name up on their buildings. The Caesars I'm talking about, they were arrogant. They talked down on everybody else. They loved to boast in pride. They were Trump. I mean, Caesars. And they had killed this Jesus. They had crucified him. And he had some followers, and they were going along. But these Caesars were mean, man, and they were bad dudes. And by the time you get to Hebrews, some folk are ready to quit. Some folk are ready to just stop and not do anything else and turn around. And Paul sees them. There are a lot of problems, but they're so worried about Caesar that they're not moving forward. The possibility is right there to change things, but they see Caesar and all of Caesar's minions, and they're about to turn around and go backwards. And Paul said, wait a minute. You better know who you are. Not who Caesar is, but who you are. Because you can't do anything about Caesar unless you know who you are. Caesar's crazy, but you better know who you are. And Paul said, let me tell you who you are. He said, we are not of those who shrink back unto destruction, but we are those who persevere unto the preservation of the soul. Faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. This is not the time to shrink. This is the time to rise. This is not the time to shrink. This is the time for us to stand up and rise up together. Do you know that all over this South, all over the South, if you registered black folk, 30% of black folk, and then you hooked them up with progressive white folk and Latino, most of the southern states could change right now. Do you know why they want to hold on to southern states? Because if you can just control the 13 former Confederate states from Virginia to Louisiana, that's 170 electoral votes. You only need about 90-some votes from the other 37 states. But if you flip that, the South has power. That's why they work so hard to keep black and white folks separated in the South. Because the South can rise again, not in racism, but in justice. Do you know that Trump only won by about 70-some thousand votes? Do you know that he really didn't win? In fact, in Wisconsin, they say he won by 30,000 votes, but 250,000 votes were suppressed. In Detroit, in Michigan, he won, they say, by 10,000 votes, but 100,000 people black folk in Michigan didn't even vote who could vote. Did you realize that more than 5 million people voted against him? And did you realize that 100 million people stayed home? My brothers and sisters, we have to say we cannot shrink any longer. We're throwing away power. We've got power to rise up together. We've got power to change this nation. You know you have power whenever your enemy does everything they can to stop you. When they got to lie and go to Russia and suppress the vote and do all of that to stop you, that is a sign that you have power. And that's why there's a song written by Hosier and Mavis Staple. It says, it's not the waking, it's the rising. And what that song means, it says, look, it's all right to be woke, but you got to do more than be woke. You got to get out of bed. And it's time for us to get out of bed. It's time for us to get out of our apathy. It's time for us to stop mourning. Mother Jones in the 1800s went to a meeting like this, and everybody wanted to pray, and she was a praying woman. And Mother Jones said, I love to pray, but there's a season you got to understand. It ain't praying time, it's standing time. It's marching time. You got to pray while you fight. And Mother Jones said, let me tell you what, you need to understand this. I need some people who will pray for the dead but fight like hell for the living. Are there any folk in here that understand it's time for us to rise with power and rise with strength and rise with love and rise with grace and rise up together? That's why we have to organize. That's why we've come to Shreveport. That's why we're leaving Louisiana tomorrow and we're going to Kentucky, in the hills of Kentucky, where they say we can't go. But we're organizing up there with the Hatfields and the McCoys and bringing white coal miners together with black folk from Louisiana. From Louisville. That's why people are coming together. Because we must understand that we are not of those who shrink. Touch your neighbor as I close and say, neighbor, if I had shrunk, I wouldn't be here today. But I had to stand up. I had to act up sometimes. I had to speak up. I had to pray up. I had to march up. I had to fight up. In this time, we cannot shrink. Not now, not ever. Not now, not ever. And so we need you. We need you to organize. If you just be seated for a second, we need you to organize. Now there's some cards here. And I need you all to take a moment and fill them out. I need you to tweet out this all over the place. Help us get these 30,000. And we need you to turn out. I promise you, Liz, come here, Liz. We promise you with everything in us that if you help build this mass poor people's assembly, it won't be anything like you've normally seen where folk are just coming, to speak for folk. We intend to put the face of poverty before the nation. Because we believe that God says, if I can just find a remnant. We believe what Paul said, we are not of those who shrink, but we are those who persevere unto the salvation. So you know what the next verse says? Faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. How many of y'all want to be the evidence of the change that's coming to America? Huh? See, I really don't know. I tell folk all the time, I don't know if what we're doing is going to bring all the change into fruition, or if what we're doing is going to sow the seed for the change. But what I know is when you stand for what's right and you don't shrink, you never lose. You never lose. Because either God uses you to transform things now, or God uses your efforts to inspire folk the next time to change, but you do not lose. But the only way you can lose is to shrink, is to allow the Caesars to push us down. They asked Frederick Douglass one time, after the Dred Scott decision, how you feel? Frederick Douglass said, well, as I look over history, every attempt to stop the movement has only served to embolden our agitation. Huh? Somebody around here ought to be angry enough, hurt enough to say, I'm gonna fight one more time. I see some gray hair in here. We need you to suit up one more time. And some of us, how old are you, Mayor? 33, some of us are 33 to 50. We need to suit up the first time because we've been living off other folks' sacrifice. Am I right about it? Huh? Yeah, we've been living off other folks' sacrifices. Huh? And then young folk, you need to just suit up for the first time. But we all need to suit up. Because this is not just about Democrat and Republican. It's not just about next year's election. Move Trump and leave McConnell, you still got a mess. Huh? Have an election and Democrats get elected and they don't talk about poverty, you still got a mess. Because then when they get in, we have to have a movement that will fight before the election, after the election, and continue with an agenda for transformation. Because folk are hurting out here. Now, how many of you, when I listed that number of poor and low wealth people, how many of you, when you're really honest about it, $500 emergency would hurt you? Anybody in here, $500 emergency would hurt you real bad. Huh? That's what, see? And some folk ain't raising because they've shamed us into the being able to acknowledge poverty, but we need to, the shame is the system that keeps people poor. That's the shame, right? And we need more folk. Louisiana, the organizers here, the key to this organizing is not doing it for the poor, but with the poor. And not to just see the poor as people who are on the street. That is a form of poverty, and it's real serious, and we take that, homelessness. But there are a lot of folks sitting right around, Reverend, in the church, looking good, wearing clothes, but $400 emergency would tear their life all apart. Let me have that cane, $400. Huh? And that's what we call poverty and low wealth. That's right. And it doesn't have to be. How many of you have a form? Would you take some time and fill it out tonight? Erica and Danielle, would you come and take the mic? They have some things they want to say. Was the teaching all right tonight? Yeah. I told Liz I just wanted to sit and teach tonight because people perish from a lack of knowledge, right? She told you what we must do. I'm trying to tell you why we must do it. And I pray that you will go out of here. We need to campaign here every month, registering people and going in the community. But this is the thing, don't go and register people to vote. Go and register them for the movement and then register them to vote. Why? Because people are tired of folks just coming to them during the election season and then don't have any relationship with them afterwards. Our movement is different. We register people for the movement. We say we want you in our family. And then we also want you to vote, but we want you in our family because we're not here to use you. We believe in the agency and the power and the possibility of poor and low-wealth people, moral leaders, and their advocates coming together. Can we do it together? Just a moment before you leave. I know and the one reason y'all said, but he didn't pay attention to the time sign. That's why they put me last. Yeah. Do you know there's an army rising? There's an army rising to break every chain. Well, play that with you. You know that? Come on. Amen. Come on here. You ain't got to sing it unless you know it. Does she know it? Oh, Lord. Come on, Doc. Come on, Danielle, and talk and tell these folk what they got to do. If you all don't mind, I've been on the road. We all have. We come out of New York this morning, flew into Dallas, drove 3 hours here. The plane we took into New York the other night, the instruments went out. We had to fly over the ocean, dump the gas, and then land without the instrumentations to tell us exactly how far we had to go. So breaking in the rain, and my prayer has simply been for the last 48 hours, Lord, I just want to thank you. I haven't been able to pray nothing else. But body's a little tired. I'm going to give this to Liz and Danielle and Erica, if you all don't mind. I'm going to step out the door. They have refreshments here afterwards and repast. Please take time. But we're going to build this movement, y'all. We're going to build this movement. Poor People's Campaign, a national call for a moral revival. God bless you and love you. Where's she at? Thank you.
God bless you, boy.
Thank you, man. Y'all take them.
May I have your attention, please? Danielle gave me a project to do. But before you move, I got a couple of things to do. We're going to have a reception next door, and you're free to go. We got some real food over there. But would you just stop whatever you're doing right now? I got one thing that I got to do before we do anything else. Come here, my sister. Yes. Just hold the music for 1 minute. One time, out of emotions, I was at the city council and I handled you wrong. And after hearing a word from the preacher, and even before then, I said to myself, if I ever had a chance to see you again, I would apologize and say to you, you're my sister and I'm sorry. Thank you. I'm your friend for life. Whatever I can do to help you. And I mean it from my heart. I said, if I ever had a chance to see you, and tonight when you showed up, I wanted to say I'm sorry, and I will never do it again. Thank you. And y'all put that on Facebook. Y'all put the other stuff. Come on, take my picture, put that on Facebook. You put all the bad stuff. You tell them too.
He said put it on Facebook.
All right, that's right. Tell him you're my sister.
I'm his sister.
For life, amen. Give the Lord a praise off. Now listen, we got plenty of food. This is Poor Man's Campaign, but I hope, because Danielle gave me this charge, I hope y'all got some money. We need to take a liberal offering, and then we'll be ready to do whatever's next. But we have some good food over next door. And if you don't have no money, look around in the church and borrow some from somebody. And let them know when you'll pay them back. We don't have ushers to march. You just come up and put it in the basket. And whatever you give from your heart will be a blessing, and we really would appreciate it. So could you come now while you're giving the forms and just give a liberal offering, and then go back to your seat for about 2 minutes, and we'll be going over next door to eat and to fellowship.
There's an army rising up.
change.